On July 4, 1919, at Toledo, Ohio, Jack Dempsey became heavyweight champion of the world when, after beating just Willard to a pulp in 3 rounds of fighting, Willard threw in the towel. What we will examine here is the question whether Willard had actually lost his crown 2 rounds earlier, when, having been knocked unconscious by Dempsey at the end of the first round, he was, in fact, counted out. Present at ringside were a crowd of sports writers, among them Damon Runyon, Nate Flesher, and Grantland Rice, and their views of what happened during the fight were printed in the newspaper the following day, as was the view of Ollie Picord, the referee. After the passage of 30 years, the story of the fight having faded into the oblivion of history, Rice and Fletcher, as well as Jack Dempsey, wrote books which included descriptions of what had happened that night. Hello to you, I'm Joe Ryan, and in presenting their versions of what happened at the fight, I want to focus your interest and attention on the primary principle that guides American juries to verdicts in our trial courts every day. The principle that to find the objective truth of any matter, you must measure what the witnesses tell you they did with what the evidence shows they did. First, let's get an understanding of who the primary characters in the story were, what their roles in the story were. By 1919, the Irish mob of gamblers had organized a syndicate of gambling clubs and pool rooms that extended coast to coast. At the top was Arnold Rothstein, who functioned for the group much as J.P. Morgan did. Acting as a facilitator, Morgan brought together financiers to underwrite various Wall Street schemes designed to manipulate market value of stocks by inflating their value in various ways. Rothstein brought together gamblers who managed the betting in various cities to underwrite national betting coups in various fields, horse racing and boxing matches to name 2. In 1919, the syndicate was behind Tex Rickard, the man the public recognized as the promoter of the Willard-Dempsey fight. Rickard had begun his career as a faro dealer in Dawson, Alaska during the Klondike Gold Rush days at the turn of the century, moving on from there to Goldfield, Nevada in 1904 and to New York in about 1915, where he got control of the lease to Madison Square Garden and transformed himself into a respectable gentleman. When World War I ended, Rickard began promoting a heavyweight championship fight, maneuvering to match the then champion Willard with several fighters, until Dempsey became the prime contender after beating Fred Fulton on July 27, 1918, in Harrison, New Jersey. As far as the public knew, the financing for the fight came from an associate of Rickard's named Frank Flournoy. Flournoy was identified to the public as a cotton broker from Memphis, Tennessee, a man Rickard is supposed to have met in Argentina when he was engaged in the cattle business there. However, search you may, but the only time you will find a public record reference to Flournoy is in the run-up to the fight in the spring of 1919. Search high and low for Flournoy before or after this moment in time, and you will come up empty. The man simply disappears from history. Flournoy is supposed to have provided Rickard with $150,000, which Rickard used to cover the $100,000 guarantee given to Willard, win, lose, or draw, and the $26,000 given to Dempsey. Where the money came from to buy the 1.5 million feet of lumber required to build the 70,000 capacity arena at Toledo, the money to pay for the construction, the money to pay the ushers needed to seat the customers in their assigned seating, the record does not say. At the end of the day, after all expenses incurred in putting on the event were paid, Rickard's net profit for the promotion was zero. What was not zero, however, was the huge amount of money that was bet on the fight across the nation, in the hundreds of gambling clubs and pool rooms operated by the Irish mob. And one must be a very naive individual indeed to think Rickard did not receive a percentage from the winnings of the national book, a book that totaled more than $2 million in bets. In the Willard-Dempsey fight, the mob made its money not on the take from the basic bet of who would win the fight. The odds on that stayed firm to fight day at 5-4. Dempsey would win the bout. The mob made its money from the freak bets, chief of which was the bet that Dempsey would knock Willard out in the first round. The odds on this bet ranged from 15-1 to 10-1, and there were a lot of bettors, including, the story goes, Dempsey's manager Jack Kearns and Damon Runyon. Ball Jack Ryan, a nationally known gambler of his day, had acted for several years before 1919 as a representative of the clique of New York gamblers in meeting with key gamblers in most of the Midwestern cities, Detroit, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Chicago. And at one time or another, he managed gambling clubs in or near these cities into the 1920s. Ryan was the known betting commissioner for the syndicate at Toledo. In addition to managing a club in the city, he rented the ballroom of Toledo's Booty Hotel and used it to take bets on the fight. According to the lore, Dempsey's manager, Jack Kearns, claimed he gave Ryan $10,000 on a 10-1 bet that Dempsey would knock Willard out in the first round, though Damon Runyon, a witness to the transaction, Kearns claimed, did not, in his lifetime, back Kearns up in print. Nat Fletcher of the New York Telegram, in his book written in the 1950s, tells us that Kearns made a statement to him at his desk, which Fletcher writes this way, quote, "I was friendly with a betting commissioner, John Get-Rich-Quick Ryan, a smart gambler known all over the country. The liveliest spot in Toledo was the Booty House. The bookie had rented a ballroom and set up his betting office. I bet $10,000 of my money in jacks that Dempsey would score a knockout in the first round. I got 10-1 from Ryan. I lost the bet fairly. There can be no questions about that. Toledo was an open betting town and the wagering was pretty high. Doc Kern's reputation for veracity was a very slim one, so it's difficult to take him at his word. Though the newspapers did report before the fight occurred that Kearns was said to have placed $16,000 of his own and Dempsey's money that Jack will win by a knockout. These wagers, the newspaper article went on to say, had been placed in various sections of the country through commissioners. Quote, it has become practically impossible to place a bet in Toledo due to the fact that local boxing fans have placed all the money they want to, and also due to the popularity of the challenger. Even those who believe Willard will be returned victor are so partial to Dempsey because of his good nature that they are reluctant to bet against him. One bet of $10,000 at even money was said to have been made. In a book written by a big spender, Jack Ryan's presence in Toledo at the heavyweight championship fight is referred to. Quote, that suited Titanic just fine. Titanic being the plunger, the big bettor. Quote, in the wake of the Dempsey-Willard fight, which made Toledo a destination for gamblers, Titanic played poker in a Toledo nightclub run by Johnny Get-Rich-Quick Ryan, rubbing elbows with cigar-chewing gangsters out of Chicago. Titanic was 27, but the crooks all talked down to him. One night, taking a break to go to the bathroom in the cellar, grumbling to himself, he was startled by a rat. He bumped a crate that fell and pinned the rat to the floor. Watching the animal struggle, he thought there had been no play like this. The Los Angeles Times of July 26, 1937, in a retrospective view of what went on at Toledo, the sports writer had this to say, quote, right up to the time of shaking hands in the middle of the ring in Toledo on July 4, 1919, Willard was a 6-5 favorite to beat Dempsey, who carried the money of many smart gamblers. One of these soldiers of fortune came all the way from Melbourne, Australia, to bet on Dempsey. He first placed $25,000 at 6-5 in a pool room operated by Baldy Ryan. On a huge blackboard, Ryan offered odds against all kinds of possibilities, including 20-1 that Dempsey would not stop Willard in the first round. The man from Melbourne, who said he knew something, bet $500 against $10,000 on that proposition. For 24 hours before the fight, it had been whispered that Dempsey was a sure thing, and also would win in the first 3 minutes. That bold prediction was made by Dempsey's trainer, Jimmy DeForest. After Willard had been knocked down 3 times in the first round, the man from Melbourne hurriedly left Tex Rickards' arena and made a beeline for Ryan's pool room, where he learned, to his surprise, that Willard had weathered the storm in the first round and had surrendered the title just as the gong rang for the fourth. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, that millions of dollars in bets that Dempsey would knock Willard out in the first round were in play when the two heavyweight fighters stepped into the ring on July 4, 1919. Certainly the gamblers, their public face Ryans, had planned their campaign to take the public's money very carefully. Nothing could be done to minimize the obvious risk that Willard might go down for the count in the middle of the round. But assessing risk is what professional gamblers do for a living. And they knew Willard, at 6'6", 250 pounds, had gone 26 rounds with Jack Johnson in 1915 and 10 rounds with Frank Moran in 1916. He had never been knocked out. Though willing to take the risk of a disaster in the middle of the round, the gamblers, from the beginning, in setting up the fight through Rickard, planned control over the officials that would manage the fight. This they did by having Jimmy DeForest act as Dempsey's trainer, which would place DeForest in Dempsey's corner during the fight. And they had Rickard announce at the last possible moment that Ollie Picord, a local Toledo man, would be the referee. Through Rickard, they also made sure an amateur, Warren Barber, would be the official timekeeper. Now, how do we know this? Because we know what Jimmy DeForest, Ollie Picord, and Warren Barber did when Dempsey knocked Willard out in the last 10 seconds of the round. A word about Jimmy DeForest. Jimmy DeForest was the connection between the Irish mob of gamblers and the continuation of the fight beyond the first round. Jimmy is seen here in the ring with Dempsey, who is sparring with one of his sparring partners before a crowd. In the original fight footage that will follow, the man you will see in the ring wearing a white cap, white shoes, and striped shirt and tie is Jimmy DeForest. DeForest began his career as a promoter and manager of fighters, having established relationships with several fighters in the 1900s, one of which, a 19-year-old, he adopted to make sure he held on to the young man's contract. Something I think happened with Mike Tyson in his career. By about 1910, DeForest became known as a trainer, establishing a training camp in New Jersey. In 1918, to prepare for his fight with Fred Fulton, Dempsey came to DeForest's camp. The relationship was renewed between the two men for the Willard fight. Whether this was at the behest of Dempsey or Kearns or influenced by some third party, the record does not say. After the fight, though, Dempsey makes clear in his autobiography, that Doc Kearns wasn't happy any longer with DeForest for some reason, and he dumped him. And DeForest passed quickly into oblivion. Let's compare now what the original footage of the actual fight shows Picord and DeForest did to what the sports writers of the Times, Grantland Rice and Nate Fleischer, say they did, and to what Dempsey himself says they did. And in that way, we can get to the truth of the matter. Here's Grantland Rice writing in 1954 in his book, The Tumult and the Shouting. Jack rubbed his own wire-stubbed jaw reflectively. Funny thing about this fight, he continued, was that Kearns claimed he had bet $10,000 to $100,000 I'd knock Willard out in the first round. That's what I did. The referee had raised my right hand awarding me the fight. Willard's head was hanging over the lower rope. He was practically unconscious. I left the ring. The fight was over. I must have been 25 yards from the ring when they called me back. That was the biggest shock I ever got when I was told the bell had rung 3 seconds too soon. Suppose it had. My hand was raised, and I had been given the fight by the referee. Here's Dempsey's story told to Bob Considine in 1959. When Willard went down the 4th time, Picord counted him out and raised my hand. The whole place had gone crazy. Kearns grabbed me, put his face next to mine, and yelled, "Go on, get out of here, get to the dressing room." I stumbled down the ring steps and started up the aisle. A lot of guys were crawling on my back. Then I heard Kearns screaming hysterically to me. I turned around and he was waving to me to come back. I climbed back through the ropes. "It's still on," he yelled. Willard was sitting on his stool and his people were working on him. Here's how Nat Fletcher put it in a biography he wrote of Dempsey in 1972. He tells the story this way. The gong sounded while Jess was sitting glassy-eyed, his mouth streaming blood. Pandemonium reigned as the seconds dragged him to his corner after Ollie Picord had counted him out. But he wasn't out. Despite the fact that Dempsey's hand had been raised in victory and Jack was quietly exiting the ring. The referee had been informed by the timekeeper, Warren Barber, that the gong had sounded at the count of 7 and the bout was not over. Here's Bob Engren of the New York World writing a syndicated story. Fighting with the fury of a bulldog, Dempsey knocked out Willard in the first round of the bout in Toledo. But for a series of amazing blunders caused by having amateurs as officials, the bout technically ended in the termination of the 3rd round when Willard called Picord to his corner to inform him he could not continue. And then back to Nat Fletcher, who's writing about a statement he says Kearns made to him at his desk at the New York Telegram. Quote, Dempsey leaped over the ropes and started on his way to the dressing room. Warren Barber, the official timer, got up and shouted at Picord and me that the fight was not over. He said the bell had sounded at the count of 7 and saved Jess from a knockout. Picord and I rushed to the ringside and yelled at Dempsey to return to the ring. And then it goes on. At the fight, I had Joe Bandon, head of the Hearst newspaper's delivery department, as my official timer. He was sitting behind Barber. It was difficult to keep count due to the din, but as Dempsey dropped Jess for the 7th time, Bannon yelled in my ear, 10 seconds. But I jumped into the ring at the sound of 7, grabbed Picord and screamed into his ear, he's out, he's out, the fight is finished, Ollie. Picord was in a trance. He was all mixed up after what I had shouted. Just as I thought he would follow my instructions, Barber got Picord's attention and my move to the referee was lost. And finally, here's Dempsey telling the story to to you in his 1977 book, written through his wife's hand, Barbara Dempsey. Quote, Ollie Picord started counting. Reaching 10, he counted Jeff out. The crowd went wild. Everyone was screaming. Doc was convinced that we'd won the fight, despite Jimmy DeForest telling him to wait a minute. Willard's being counted out didn't correspond with DeForest's stopwatch. Notice we got a lot of people around here with stopwatches. Shut up, I said. For 100,000, who the hell cares if there's something wrong with the bell? Picord, raise Jack's hand, raise his hand. And Ollie raised my hand, grinning. I was stunned. Doc rushed up to me, threw his arms tightly around me, and told me to get out of the ring. I did, as people started to climb into the ring. Jimmy told me to move faster. We were by the press seats when Jimmy half turned and saw that the ring was in a state of chaos. Doc, half in and half out of the ropes, was frantically waving me back. Ollie had told him that the fight wasn't over. And Warren Barber, the official timekeeper, screamed over the confusion that if I didn't get back in the ring, I'd be disqualified. The bell rope had, as he called it, fouled. No one had heard the bell. Willard had been down only 7 seconds when it clanged. Let's now look at Ollie Picord. Picord, who, of course, is the key to the situation. In doing so, we have 3 minutes and about 10 seconds of actual footage of fight action in a 4-minute round. Whoever edited this footage was very clever. We have 14 seconds of footage showing the movements of Picord after he finished counting Willard out. And we have 14 seconds of footage showing Willard surrounded by his cornermen sitting on the canvas. And we can compare what this footage shows us against what the narrative that's provided to us through the several sources I've quoted tells us. Best of all, we have Ollie Picord publishing his version of the account, his story, on July the 5th, 1919 in the New York American. And this is what is attributed within 24 hours of the fight's end to the referee, Ollie Picord. Quote, Dempsey had downed the big fellow, and I was counting over him. Suddenly I heard a shout. Glancing at the timers, I saw them waving and shouting. The bell had rung for the end of the round, but I hadn't heard it. I was counting 7 when I made out the shout that the round was over. I waved Dempsey to the corner and called for someone to help Willard. I saw the crowd rushing toward the ring. They all thought the fight was over. Dempsey's seconds thought the same thing. Dempsey was hurried from the ring. Dempsey's manager thought the same thing. I had trouble getting them back. It was the tightest corner I ever was in during my ring experience. I finally explained things, and the timers obtained a whistle. Unquote. This published in the New York American 24 hours after the event. Now, let's look at the 14 seconds of footage that's been provided to us by the manipulators of this situation and see with our eyes what Pickard actually did. It's astounding.
Dempsey pumping right and left into it. Clear across the opposite corner. And there he's taking it again. How can the man stand it? And there he falls, his gloved hand feeling for the rope, trying to hold himself up. Then, painfully, he drags his racked body to a half erect position. But a right smashes into his side. Other rights crash to the head, and Willard collapses into a sitting position, dazed and helpless after the most thing. And there's the bell. But no one hears it. Dempsey turns away. He seems doubtful, puzzled. Turns, and others rush jubilantly into the rope square. It's all over. The quickest heavyweight knockout on record. Jack hurries out of the ring to avoid the crowd.